My name is Britta Cabanos, and I am the co-founder of Creative Capital Design. My partner, Rebecca, is hiding back there. She's making me do this on my own. And we're also Inside Fashion Design, so if you don't know us, well, that's where you bought your ticket, and we're the hosts of the event tonight. We hosted 2 events last year and collaborated on a 3rd one for Design Week Portland, and just had great turnout, and it was so fun, and we decided to do another one. And we ended up partnering with Zeba, so a big thank you to them. The space is amazing, and I've attended some talks here and never imagined that we would be hosting an event here, so we're super thrilled to be here. So there's so many people to thank. I can't thank everyone. I just want to say the community here is amazing. Everyone rallied and really pulled this event together. The models, the hair people, our team, most of it volunteer. So the models have been fabulous, and it's just such a great community here. So we're thrilled to be a part of it. A special thank you to Todd Harple, who will come out in a moment, and of course to the panelists. When we were thinking about the theme for the event this year, there's so much happening in tech and interdisciplinary crossover between design and other industries, other disciplines. So we really wanted to pose this question of what does the future look like? And when I reached out to Todd and we started talking about this, he is in this world of all of these tech people, and he was so gracious and introduced me to the panelists, and had such great ideas and generosity in their time and their effort and pulling this group together. So a big thank you to Todd, and Jim is our co-moderator. He's local. And then we, of course, have Billie Whitehouse, Asher Levine, and Francis Bitonti, who spent a lot of time. These guys travel the world. So to have them here, I think, is super special. And they were very generous, and coordinating their flights and getting them all here at the same time was a challenge, but they're here. And we wanted to also have guests that were not necessarily in Portland, so that we could hear different points of view that we're maybe not used to. You know, we have such a great community here, but we all kind of travel in the same world of the Nike and Adidas and Columbia, which is great. But I thought it would be really great to have East Coast and West Coast and get a different point of view. So I think they bring that. So I'm super thrilled and grateful again, and I'll pass it over to Todd. But a couple quick housekeeping things. You'll see the doors closed up there. We do need to have a hard stop at 8:30 for security reasons, so you're gonna exit this way. If you want to ask questions, we're handing out cards because it's kind of hard to hear maybe. So if you have a question, write it down. We'll collect them at the end. And there's also a card you can fill out if you want to just keep in touch with CCD or IFD. Part of what we do is share stories and try to inspire each other and support each other. So we'll, at the end, towards the end, we'll gather the cards if you have questions. Okay, so I will pass it over to Todd.
Hi, everyone. There's some seats down in the front for you in the back if you're feeling a little bit, we actually got double mic here. All right, that's cool. Thanks for coming out tonight, and welcome to Zeba's living room. And also welcome to sort of socially my living room. You're gonna get something a little different tonight. I'm not gonna give you what you can look up online, because you can look it up online. I'm gonna give you some of my personal stories, my personal relationships with these people that are some of the most amazing people I know. And I truly mean that. I've been working around fashion tech, probably about 6, 7, 8 years, even beyond when my company stopped working in that space. I just have been drawn into it, and it's been so exciting for me. I've had things walk the runway at New York Fashion Week, done stuff locally with Fashion Next, done some amazing things. And these people are the core of where it all started happening for the most part. I'm gonna bring them out one at a time, because I'd like for you to really recognize how special each one of them is and the work they do. So first, I'm going to bring out a gentleman who's become a really good friend of mine, Francis Bitonti. Come on out. Have a seat. So Francis and I have known each other for over, 5, 6 years or something?
Yeah, I think it's been 5 or 6 years now.
Yeah, so I met Francis sort of happenstance. So he had been at the luxury conference in Miami.
Yeah, it was the New York Times luxury conference.
As one does, at least as Francis does. And so he meets the CEO of Intel down there, and they talk about scanning feet, 3D scanning feet.
As you do.
As you do. And I was working in our new technologies group at the moment, so several weeks later, it trickled down to me, go see this guy in Brooklyn and tell him about this scanner for feet.
Yep. And I was in a 5-story walk-up in Brooklyn, and Todd was wandering the streets.
It was a very inauspicious place, Brooklyn, and that part of Brooklyn. And I bumped into him on the street, and honestly, I did read about him online. I looked at him online and made some judgments.
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
What does that mean, Todd?
You've seen the pictures. You've seen your pictures. Come on, man.
I was having fun. I was very cool back then.
So what was supposed to be a 30-minute meetup of just talking about how to scan feet turned into, 2 or 3 hours?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time
Yeah,
together.
we spent like 2 or 3 hours, and since that time, we've been talking and doing stuff for a long time. I hope some of you got a chance to take a look at the scoliosis brace up there. Did everybody get a look at that? Thank you. So this was a very cool project, and it wasn't our first project. So by the time that project came about, we had done a few others for Fashion Week, collaborations with Chromat. I hope some of you have heard of Chromat and Becca McCarran doing some amazing work. But Francis, one of the things he does is he designs tools for the digital age. This is a Francis thing. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think we run our practice under the idea that, I think tools enable, they give designers capabilities, right? They give you capacities, and I think depending on what types of tools we're working with, they enable thought, right? And I think if you design and you structure your interactions with your materials and your tools and your way of drawing, then that helps you solve problems, right? And we start all of our work from that perspective, is thinking about what are the types of tools that'll enable me to see the types of things I need to see to solve this problem.
Right, and we've explored different materials as well, which is sort of part of that.
Yeah, that's a big part of that, and I think that's a gateway to material innovation. I mean, we work so much with 3D printing that, I often find we're able to produce so much complexity with 3D, to produce so much complexity through 3D printing that, like traditional CAD tools kind of fall apart, and that's like where that starts, right? It's like those tools were never meant to manage that kind of complexity. So it's to me, those two things, like it's a bridge to that type of innovation, because if you think about like what our CAD tools are like today, like it's about like machining things or making molds, right? And like the way of expressing geometry and the way of expressing form inside of those tools lends themselves to solving those kinds of problems. But when you start thinking about additive or knitting or whatever else you're thinking about, right, you need a different way of drawing, and you need to structure your relationship to the problem differently.
Yeah, so the scoliosis brace, he was developing a tool, a generative design tool. Now, I'm an anthropologist, so to me, I'm like, generative design, what does this mean? And it sounds very exotic. And I always end up breaking down these things. I also have a background in museum stuff, so I put it at the 6th grade level, and you can make a tool that tell it what you want to, tell it what the boundaries are, and let it do the rest. Right?
Right, because if you think about it, that's how you solve these problems. You define the boundaries. What are the edges? What's the minimum amount of material I can have, right? You're thinking about the kind of critical limits of the system, like what will it accept before it fails, but everything else between that is where you want to explore. And so much of design is just running through those iterations, right? It's not, as much as we want to think like it's really high-level thought, it's not. We're just tweaking things and looking at what's happening. And computers are really good at that.
It's kind of analogous to working across the boundaries, right? I always tell people that fashion tech and innovation, it really comes from, if it doesn't sound like a bad bar joke at the beginning, you're probably not doing it right. An architect, an anthropologist, and a fashion designer walk into a room. And it's true. All the best collaborations seem to come from this, because we get transdisciplinary work I mean, and of all the people that we have here tonight, none of them, well, I'm sorry, one of them, sorry, Billie, is a trained fashion designer, which that we should bring Billie out. Everybody, this is Billie Whitehouse. Nice.
Hello.
So Billie and I actually go back slightly farther than Francis and I. When I first started doing wearables work at Intel, I actually was, I discovered this small company. They still had a full name, not just an X at the end of it. They were called Wearable Experiments. And they had made a jacket, a very smart blazer, and I mean that in both the design sense and in the tech sense, that had haptics in the shoulders, that you could be in a strange city and be walking around and have it tap you on the shoulder for when it was time to turn to follow your navigation. And I thought this was super clever, and it didn't look like the ridiculous fashion tech I was seeing. I mean, I wasn't about to wear Google Glass and a lot of these things. They don't look like things we would wear. And so I looked Billie up. I found her and her other co-founder at the time, Ben, and started a conversation. And since then, we began to work more and more, well, talk more and more together. We've tried to work together directly for years, and it's never quite worked. But one of the fascinating things about Billie is all of her projects have been real fashion, in the sense that it isn't a tech company trying to make fashion. It's a fashion company that also does tech. And she also thinks a lot about interaction in ways that most of us haven't. So, Billie, how did you start using, well, explain what haptics is and why you started using haptics.
Happy to. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me. I wanted to know any hands in the room who has heard of the word haptics before? That's pretty great. Wow.
Good Portland.
Yeah. So any kind of interface that has a response or feedback loop, that's what we work within. We particularly use ERM motors, and we use them integrated in apparel so that they can be washable and tumble dryable, although we've probably made every mistake under the sun trying to get there. We started, trying to make fashion feel really interesting using haptics, and we built this navigational product to really get you to stop spending so much time on your screen. Still a problem. In fact, a really interesting stat is that more pedestrian injuries come from people looking at their screen than from anything else. So we were trying to allow people to walk around a city without having to stare down at this. In doing this, we've, again, learned many things, mostly about how not to do things. And then we've come back to a place where we're really happy and we've made something really sophisticated. But it's still an integration of our haptic platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that, you stretched out into this from mainstream fashion. So for those of you who don't know, Billie comes from fashion royalty, at least from down under fashion royalty.
Is there such a thing?
It is a thing. Having done my PhD in Australia, I can tell you it's a thing. But Billie, her mom founded the Whitehouse Institute, which is in many ways, the comparable sort of Parsons of Down Under. Is that fair?
Yeah. We also host Australia's Project Runway. But there's always a slightly more emotional story, which I like to tell. My mother actually left my father with $1,000 in the bank, a newborn baby, and placed one ad in the newspaper to get 26 students. And in her first year of business, where she was teaching fashion design, she couldn't afford to pay rent. So her best friend mortgaged his house for her, and we now have a library named after him. So I think it's quite a wonderful story of entrepreneurship.
So it's very significant that she comes from fashion. So the fact that she comes from fashion, how did you find your way to your co-founder and into actually integrating electronics?
Yeah, so having worked across probably every side of my mum's business, and please don't go work for your family businesses, it's so hard. I think, again, learned how to do things the wrong way many times. I was tasked with writing our 5 and 10 year plan of, what does education look like for a business like this, and how do we work with 3D printers, and how do we do mass customization, and what does data have to do with design? And I was rewriting courses, and in doing that, I sort of deep dived on sensors and came up with a few really wacky ideas, no idea how to build any of them, but taught myself a few things, and then thank God had a team of people who were way smarter than me around who could help me do them.
I think that's a good point too. When we think about collaboration, I love to surround myself with people who are smarter and more creative than me. It really makes me look good. So next we'll introduce the person I met. Actually, all of you are in the order I met you, except for you two. You could be a little bit swapped. But I met Asher at a conference in LA that was around sustainability in fashion. And honestly, I was like, how could this person possibly have anything to do with sustainability? But then, you get to talk to him, you get to learn more about his work, and there's a specific ethos he has around that. Now, his work is really special. I mean, again, not a fashion-trained person. He's trained in business. How about that? Going from business to fashion rather than the other way. And his designs look otherworldly. He uses multiple materials in ways that most of us would never dream of. Maybe some of your AI stuff might dream of that. I don't know. And then on top of that, there's an amazing hand craftsmanship to all of his work. It looks impeccable, and it's surprising, impeccable. I hope you all got to see his design that was walking around. Did you see it? Yeah, some? Yeah, all right. Well, it was beautiful, and there will be plenty of pictures if you didn't see it. So I'd like to bring up Asher Levine. So Asher, he started going down the path of making complete collections, like a lot of fashion designers dream of doing, but you kind of abandoned that. Tell us about that. Oh, he doesn't get a mic.
It's all good. Yeah, I think I've done, hey everyone, I'm Asher. I think I've done 14 collections now. I think everyone should do some collections. If you want to take fashion as your route, do collections. It's definitely a process, making 20 to 30 looks, 2 to 4 pieces per look. But when it comes to sustainability, even the luxury brands don't make their money on ready-to-wear, right? So I'm focused right now on focusing on one product, but it's taken me nearly 10 years to get there. But within those 10 years, I've been a yes person. I've worked with many musicians. I worked with advertising agencies because of the work that I did through the ready-to-wear lines. So I don't regret anything, but now I'm at a stage where it's about focus.
Was this part of the whole move to LA, was to focus better?
Oh, I don't know. I just wanted something different. I was in New York 12 years, and I love New York. And but you're kind of a product of your environment, and I wanted my brain. I mean that I wanted to be kind of well-rounded. I mean, you've been there 6 years, and I was there 12 years, and I didn't want that to be my only touch point of as you grow. So I'm really happy in LA. I work a lot in the entertainment industry because a lot of what I do is very experimental. I focus on the aesthetics of technology. It's really interesting. We have crossover aesthetics, right? Like Francis, he likes working in fractals using AI. I love working in fractals, but we generate a lot of it with our hands. So I'm fascinated at design and technology and how you create utility from the two.
Well, that brings me to a quote that you had. There's a great quote in Money magazine. Yeah, Money. That that Asher had, and I'll read it to you because I think it's super interesting, and then we'll bring out our final co-moderator and the panelist. But basically, he says, your product is a reflection of the tools you have. This is a new tool for people to make objects. You don't have to have 8 years of schooling. People are going to start to make their own things. And I thought the notion that your product is a reflection of the tools you have is deceptively profound. Where did that come from?
Well, I mean, I'm obsessed with tools. Like, one of my favorite things to do is actually get old tools, like the ones that you actually can't find in the garment district anymore, because I am a hands-on person. I started sewing when I was 10. My mother put me in a sewing class, and it was like my deep, dark secret in Florida. You did not want to be the only boy sewing, but I was actually like punched in the face for it when I was 12, but they can, I don't know what they're doing now, they're somewhere. Yeah, so I started sewing, and then I became the president of Silly Stitchers. It was a 4-H organization. I'm not ashamed anymore.
Do you have a card?
Huh?
I want to see the Silly Stitcher card,
The card?
the business card.
Oh, I have record books of like me modeling, what I did. It was competitive sewing, actually. You would make a garment. No, really, you would make a garment, and then you'd be judged by like the grannies that know how to sew. And then you would like go to state level. It was like a thing. But it was like my deep dark
Competitive
secret.
sewing.
But then at the same time, I like loved building computers in high school. I loved components and putting it together and working on the operating system and the MS-DOS and all of that. And then I'm obsessed with biology, chemistry, really the natural world. I think more of us and the world needs to be exposed of the world around us. We're so like cocooned in our own world, and that gets into politics and whatnot. But I really think fashion and politics and philosophy, there's a convergence. And then I founded my line in 2009, because when I graduated business school, I wanted to be busy immediately. So I launched my first collection for men in 2009. It was very avant-garde. I just thought that men's styles haven't changed in 200 years, and women's, you see things new down the catwalk every 6 months. So I'm like, men should have a little bit of options. So I launched that, and then a month later, I was like commissioned by Lady Gaga to, to make a jacket, because I like making leather jackets. And then that kind of like started my career. And then I started working with musicians, and then making custom apparel, because I can make things with my hands, and I learned, school helps you learn about a balance sheet and Excel and managing people. And then that's what I did. That was 10 years ago.
That is a perfect segue into our final discussant up here. Jim Chi, why don't you come out? Everybody, welcome Jim Chi. So Jim is on the advisory board of the PSU Business School. PSU is helping support us tonight. Thank you very much. And he's also one of the founding members of the Oregon Sports Angels. So he's got certainly an angle and he has an extensive history in sort of mass market products, getting things to the market, scaling them. And this is there's two interesting threads of a story here. Education, only one of us is mainstream fashion education. And then thinking about mass customization and things like that and production. These are things that most of us aren't great about. My company does a lot with silicon, but with garments, it's kind of dicey. So Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about, tell us about your experience with business school and the interface with fashion, if you know, and then a little bit about your new company that that you're the president of, eDye, which is getting into this space of fashion that may or may not be so high volume.
It's great to be here with all of you and with the group that's here on the panel. And what I wanted to share with everyone here about some of the things that Todd mentioned as a topic is that in our industry, we're talking about fashion where there's a creative process where you're coming up with an idea and building a unit of one, like what Asher's doing. And then when you look at other industries that are related to this, you have the larger global brands that are producing things in the quantities of hundreds of thousands, upwards of millions of units. And so the difference in how businesses operate and how our industry has to operate to support that difference in scale is something that we have to think about, and how that affects, one of the topics that the brands have to deal with now is when you produce something in hundreds of thousands of units, what does that do to our environment and the sustainability efforts? So the impact of how do you correct for that, or how do you adjust for that? Those are the type of topics that are very relevant in our industry right now, and that has a very much an impact on the business side of this. And so that's the type of perspective that I wanted to share with this group, because the tools, the direction, the technology that we're talking about with this group has a direct impact on what we can do on a broader scale for the consumers. And not everybody is going to be able to have a custom designed product for themselves. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to get to that point because of some of the tools where, like what Francis was saying, is that we will have tools that will allow for that. So these are the type of things that we want to address tonight, and really appreciate a chance to be here with all of this.
Great, thank you. I think it's really interesting that you bring up, mass production and things like that, because we're all kind of taught that that's where we got to get. We got to get there to get the economies of scale. And I'll throw this out there to the whole panel, but is that completely relevant in today's world? Is it really about economies of scale and mass production? Or are there other ethoses that are at play and other market forces at play that sort of turn that on its head?
So we do mass produce our products. I'd love to be doing millions of units because that would bring down my bill of materials extraordinarily. The reality is we're actually looking at how we can do a cyclical effect. So when people return their product to us, we're actually looking at how we can make that old product into new fibers, and or cushioning for creating encapsulation for our existing products. So there's, I would say, a few ways of looking at it. When you buy a product that's intelligent, you can update it via software. So ideally, you can keep updating it over time and it can keep getting new superpowers. So hopefully that will allow you to keep it for a little longer, which means you don't toss it away. When you do toss it away, hopefully you bring it back to a company like ours who'll try and make it into something else. That's not always how it goes. We see that people still throw things out. It doesn't matter what you tell them, and even if you ask them to return it to you, they still don't. So there's still a loophole that we've got to cover off. But I would say people are trying, and I think that's got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, well, Francis, or not Francis, sorry, Asher. I'm looking at Asher and then talking to Francis. All right, Asher. Earlier tonight, you were telling me about what you thought of sustainability when we were talking about it, and can you say a little bit about how your approach to it is with regards to volume versus custom garments?
Yes, okay. I think it's a balance. Like, everything should be balanced, right? Like, your life should be balanced. Don't eat a ton of meat. Like all of you don't need to. I mean, again, we're working on new types of leather. We're working in mycelium leathers.
You just derailed him.
I think, yeah. It's just we're consuming so much, and we don't need to. We're seeing the excess, and I think that we need to create products that we want to hold on to for years. And I think it would be great to make like a T-shirt that changes like a leaf. How a leaf changes in the fall, and you want to hold on to it because in 3 years it's going to be a whole different design. So this is the type of mentality that I try and put in my designs. And I don't sell to stores. I just sell to people because I think fashion should be made for your body because everyone's body is different. Sizes don't make sense, right? Especially women, like your curves are your curves, and when I talk, exactly, right? Sizes, schmizes, and why try and fit into something? It doesn't make sense. So, I've had this vision for 10 years of how you tie body scanning to pattern making software, to 3D rendering, and it's happening, and it will happen, and that's what technology does, is brings first-class amenities to the masses, right? Everyone used to have a private driver, but now we have a private driver. It's called Uber. 100 years ago, it's only the upper class that can afford custom-made clothes, but in 15, 20 years' time, you're not going to have to go shopping anymore. There won't be inventory. So how can we have new models where there is no inventory and it's actually better than the clothes that we have today?
So your vision of the future is no inventory required, everything's custom made?
Exactly, yeah.
What about you, Billy? Do you share that vision?
I would say that there's a language of personalization that is really important that speaks 100% to your vision. I more so think that we will belong in a bubble of data that we'll have full control over. And with that, you'll be able to understand how and when you want to share that data and use that to create an experience on the body that is both personalized and commercialized, so that it can be a mix of the two.
So the data question is really interesting, both from a design perspective and from, a privacy perspective. Especially a product like yours, a heck of a lot about who's moving, how they're moving, how mobile they are. I mean, I can imagine if I was an insurance company, I might be like, hey, Billy, who's using your product and who's very flexible and who's not?
So thank God we are GDPR compliant, which means that we don't access individuals' data. It's only at a cohort level. What's really important is the individual can delete their data entirely if they would like to. They can also access it to understand it. In the future, if they are interested in this, and this is something that we are working on right now, we'd like for them to be able to enter in their injuries and potentially share that with their physiotherapist. So that if they are working on recovery and they're using particular yoga poses as part of that recovery, their physiotherapist can see if they're actually doing their exercises. Again, this is something the customer will have the ability to turn on or turn off. It's very much under their control. But I think that this bubble of data that I like to describe is owned by the customer, not the enterprise. And that's really up to us and you guys to build that.
See, I've always imagined that in the future there will be, like our clothing will have data, we'll be collecting it and so forth, just as Billy says. But I imagine it almost like a black box. So when something goes wrong, we can open it up and go, what's going on here? I don't have the mobility I had, I don't have the movement, maybe, whatever it might be. I've always envisioned it kind of like that.
I kind of see it like a force field.
You're making me picture a video game with a force field around the dude.
Todd, let me add a point to that. Yesterday wrapped up the NCAA basketball tournament, and if you look at that as an example of this in terms of data and movement, what does it mean in terms of athletes whose performance information collected through wearable technology, what does that mean in the future as far as who owns that data? Is that something that could be marketed for things like games? Or in terms of the gambling industry, wouldn't it be great if you knew before the NCAA tournament started which team has the best possibility of winning because of athlete performance? So things like that come into question in terms of privacy of data and who owns the data, and that's at the NCAA level. What about the professional level? Who owns that data? Is it the players? Is it the teams? Is it the league? So those are the kind of things that will have to be addressed, not only from our industry and what we produce, but how does our products get used?
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with some of that right now. My present role, I lead work into our Olympic program. So sponsoring the Olympics, and working with elite athletes. But in doing the research, I've been to talks, and actually I think ownership is probably the wrong way to talk about data. I think it's about access. We really need to stop using physical world descriptions for digital world realities. And I think that's really important because the laws we've made for physical world just don't apply the same. I mean, owning data, it's there. I might protect it, but access to it, we all could have access to the same data, unlike having, we can't share a shirt simultaneously, but we could share data. So I think that's an interesting thing. And with regards to ownership on the professional level, the teams own the access to it, and sometimes team doctors, and the teams make interesting decisions based on that, and now there's some legal implications as well. If I know that I have a wearable on your wrist for you to be getting your proper sleep, I might be able to subpoena that if I saw somebody who looked like you committing a crime. So it's pretty tricky. But going back to data, data as a tool, Francis, when we talk about data as a tool, I thought it was really interesting. So the scoliosis brace up there, it came into being mainly because we were putting a sensor into a scoliosis brace that was 3D printed, and it was brought to my attention because I was working in fashion, and they said, what would you do with it? And I asked for boundary conditions. What could I not change on this thing? Because I don't build orthotics or braces. I don't fully understand. Well, I have a vague idea now, but I mean, I don't fully understand it. And they told me some forces needed to be maintained, and the rest was more or less irrelevant. So I literally picked up the phone and called Francis, asked him to do me a solid, asked him to do it for free, and to try something out.
That's proof we're friends. Yeah, that was an interesting project because nobody really had a very good understanding of the mechanics going on in those braces. I mean, there were a lot of people who had a very strong intuitive understanding, right? Like there were people making these braces by hand, and they were very much like handled and dealt with like on a very case by case basis. And it was, it's kind of like going to a blacksmith to get a horseshoe, right? Like, I mean, to your point, like it's like everybody's getting this kind of bespoke thing, and like that's often where I think 3D printing shines. Is like these situations where like you actually have to address a very large population, but you have to address them kind of one by one. And I think that's where these systems of like economies of scale aren't necessarily the most efficient path. But like, and then 3D printing kind of bridges that gap very well, because now what we're able to do is we can take that person's personal data about their condition, we can understand the forces that are taking place within that brace, and then we can make something custom. And like that work with Unique has continued on, and it's the data that we've collected has revealed some very interesting things, and nobody's ever collected this data about this device ever. And nobody's ever, like, because that brace is actually created by algorithm, we understand the parameters that go into make it. So like the data set that we have in terms of correlating the design parameters to the condition is like extremely powerful, and it's going to lead to some really, really amazing things.
I think it's changing the field. I mean, I remember sitting down at dinner in San Francisco with the orthotist, and he was explaining he basically just shoves some foam up in there till it feels kind of like the way he thinks it should feel. This is how it was done.
Well, right, and that same orthotist, he called me a month ago and he said, I didn't believe you that this could be automated, but I've realized I'm typing in the same numbers over and over again. And like he never thought about it numerically. He thought about it as like pressing on soft tissue on somebody's body and stuffing in a pad. He never thought it could be quantified.
I mean, it was super interesting, and he's like being modest, not telling you about his tool that actually made that magic happen.
Yeah, we've in the last year we've launched a product. It's an API. It's a cloud compute service. We call it Genesis, and it's a set of tools that we've developed over about 7 years of consulting and building software for people. And we run it in the cloud and on our website, and it's designed to kind of do this, right? Let you build applications that will create physical products and allow you to use data as input to do
So
that.
effectively, AI as a collaborator. Think about that. AI as a creative collaborator, not a mind-numbing, get to the root number. It's a creative collaborator, and I think that's a really healthy and interesting way to be thinking about AI.
Yeah, it's like an assistive tool, right? But I think there's also, there is a side to this where like we are actually automating parts of design. Like some of the stuff that we've worked on, people were doing it before, right? Like those were like entry-level design jobs, and like, but the truth of the matter is like, my first design job was like sitting in a room making like iterations on a model or an idea, but like there's no reason for a human brain to do that. That's a complete waste of time, right? But that's the kind of stuff that computers are very good at. And like
Spoken like a Long Islander.
yeah, well, design is full of these things that we do. Like it's just like, why are you doing this? You're just repeating the same thing over and over and over.
But if we look down at Asher here, his work, it's exactly that. It's repeating things over and over for your.
But you're not, right? Because you're creating new problems every time, right? Like if you were trying to make like the jacket we were talking about last night, like it took 6 people. Like if you tried to do that for like 100,000 people, you're insane. Right, but like because you're doing it once, and it's like it's this kind of thought. It's a totally different exercise, right?
Yeah. Well, I see an interesting crossover in the work between the two of you, and Asher pointed out a little bit earlier, and I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about that, because I think that's fascinating.
Fractals and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, fractals and stuff.
Yeah, fractals and
I mean,
stuff,
yeah, this guy will talk about fractals till he's blue in the face. But I mean, I think it's really interesting that he comes completely from algorithmic design, and you're coming in the opposite direction from craftsmanship and artisanship.
Yeah, I mean, like, why do we wear animal skins, right? They're beautiful. We have a fascination with them. We have a fascination with the natural fractals that are around us. And I like the idea, I mean, like, we're in an onion of reality right now, right? There's, if you go down, there's all of these textures as you keep going down. And then when you expand, there's even more textures. And so I like the idea of making skins from different levels of magnification. And then when you go down to microscopic, you see a lot of these like repeating patterns. What are some of the patterns called again?
What's that?
The different fractals.
I mean, they're fractals, right?
Yeah, there's like different classifications of fractals. Like there's the rivers, and then there's like the Fibonacci, and
Well, I think they're like level numbers, right? It's like level 1, they're like complexity scales. But yeah, I think they probably.
Yeah.
thank you. Exactly.
What was that? I missed that. Mandelbrot sets, yeah. That's another type. I mean, yeah, but it's like, I think where we aligned on this was, I think, like, I see math as like a way of just, because like design, it's all about describing form, right? And like, we can do that with language, but it really often falls short. But like math can create patterns, like, and these numerical patterns, they translate, you kind of impress them on material, which is why I got really, like, I can't draw, I can't make anything. Like that was the reason I got into this, was like, I went to design school and I couldn't do any of the stuff. So then, but I knew how to write code. So I was like, well, I'm never gonna pass, so I'm gonna start writing computer programs to make these things, right? Because like that was just like, that was like how I could express myself.
You'll show them.
Right. Well, it's like, you know, it's like I learned to dance because I couldn't talk. Right. I need some way to do this. But like I think like what we like, you know, we're solving the same thing. We're trying to do the same thing in a lot of ways.
Well, and then we fuse it to the human body, right? And
Right.
at the end of the day, like, why are we wearing clothes, right? Like, I mean, like, did we start wearing clothes and then civilization happened because we weren't like preoccupied with having sex with each other, right? And then it turns into, I mean, think about it, like, what do clothes mean? Like the visuals, like, you know, light hits the clothes and then it goes, then the light goes into someone else's eye, and then you think about like what a silhouette means. And at the end of the day, it's like, is that sexy, right? Like we all want to kind of be, I mean, maybe not everyone wants to look attractive and necessarily in what they're wearing. They want to actually maybe shield themselves. But I think generally most of us want to look good. And it's like, I think that's where the challenge is like fusing kind of the new technologies and the new forms and changing what is sexy.
And that's interesting. I mean, and we do see that a lot in what's emerging now. I mean, I think about, because I've worked with her a lot, Becca McCarran of Chromat, sexy is what sexy wants to be, you know. It can be any size, any shape, any color, and that's okay. There's a lot of sort of pushback against what the fashion industry has told us is sexy or what is good looking, and it can be any number of things. And I think that's a really interesting angle as well.
Well, what do you think? Like, I have questions, you know, like, do you think that it's what the media dictates as sexy, or does sexy influence the media? Like, what do you think?
Reflecting life or the other way around?
Yeah, like, what do you think?
I don't know, but is it encoded? Like, right? Like, I mean, maybe it's even deeper than that. Like, maybe it's like a genetic thing.
It's encoded.
Yeah.
Like, is it just in our DNA to be attracted to certain things? Like, I think, like, on some root level, that's what's really going on.
There's a really great book, and it was called Beauty is Not in the Eye of the Beholder. It was actually about, you know, the algorithms that create what we have like discerned to be beautiful lines, shapes, colors, tones, textures, and why there are particular faces that we all recognize.
Yeah, the
because
symmetries.
Some of it is symmetry, some of it is like the angle of your nose and the shape of your lip compared to your eye shape. It's everything as one. And for me, it actually relates back reasonably nicely to the data conversation. I'm sure a few of you have read Gödel, Escher, Bach before. But what you're both saying to me is like, it's very much the same. It's, you know, we're creating and we're using languages sometimes that are faulted. And both math science, and like the English language. It has its own limitations, but we create these repeating patterns to be able to understand what is going on and create interesting shapes and design solutions. And in those patterns, we create recursion, and that in itself is where fractals come from. And there's beautiful ways of exploring that, not just in a design process, but also the way you like process your own data. When you're creating interesting algorithms to understand people's body orientation, perhaps.
And I like how there's the connection back to math and fractals.
But like when I was starting out as a designer, like I was just on a quest to make the ugliest stuff I could, right? Because like, well, because that's where
That was your goal?
Yeah, no, I wanted to not feel comfortable with it, right? Because that would mean that like I had found some kind of limit of like my understanding of aesthetic, what I thought was beautiful. Because like that's that kind of, I mean that's like if you're gonna do like limited run work, like I think that's the place you want to be. Right, because then you're at least, now we're asking that question, like what.
So what's the ugliest thing you ever made?
Oh God, it was a bike rack I made. It was for the.
It looked like kind of like spit.
I did a bike rack for the Department of Transportation. It was the first thing I did after school. I don't know how the hell I won this competition. It looked like a booger, like, and I rendered it on like a carpet, like it was supposed to go into the city, like I dropped this like CD in a mailbox. I was one of like 5 out of like 30,000 that ended up, and I had no idea how to make it, like absolutely zero idea. $30,000 later, we made it, and it got stolen, and that was the first.
There are
thing
pictures.
I ever did. Yeah, it was really unsightly, and like I think that was like kind of. But I wanted that, right? Because like that was like at that time I was trying to figure out, like I was asking myself this question, right? Like what? Because like I didn't have a style. I didn't really have an attitude on form, but like I was like, well, where are the lines? Like where are the rules? Like,
Were you
where's the
trying
field?
to never make money?
Yeah, well, it's
Still trying?
still trying. Yeah.
'Cause I think about that,
I wasn't thinking about it at that age.
An
right?
investor, yeah, maybe not. I was gonna say an investor like Jim or a business professor talking to you.
No, I mean at that age I was like, I didn't care. I didn't think I was gonna live past like 25, right? Like it was like, I didn't know any better. Like I was, like I thought that was the most important question to answer at the time, right? So
What are
that
the
was
limits
I
of
did.
ugly?
Yeah, like in my mind, like my 22-year-old brain, that was the most important thing I could do with my life. So that's evolved since then, but yeah.
I once tried to grow plants out of a silk organza jumpsuit, and it was I wanted to weight these like bell sleeves with lentils, and then I wanted to dye I wanted to dye the sleeves. So unfortunately, I made soup. It was a true disaster. But experimentation is very good for the process.
Are we talking about like the ugliest things that we've made now?
I didn't intend to go down that path. It's Francis's fault.
Isn't it surprising when you think it's the ugliest thing, but then people like actually like it? I don't know. I made this jacket for will.i.am once. He like needed it for Dancing with the Stars, and I couldn't even believe that I was shipping it. But I had to ship something, and then it was actually the one that he chose to wear.
Oh,
and so, it actually read well on camera, and I guess that's what matters at the end of the day.
So see, any business school wisdom would not have helped these guys, and yet they won in their respective challenges.
Well, let me say this. I mean,
Let's
in
get some
terms
wisdom here.
of the designer's appeal in terms of what they like about their own products versus what you just said about the fact that, hey, will.i.am received this and he chose to wear this. So again, in terms of what products you create and what you take to market, it's not about what you like in some cases. If you're doing this for somebody, you've got to get into their mind in terms of what they're going to like.
There are a lot of ugly
what you
people
have to
out there.
deliver to be successful is what your customer wants. And so I think there's a lesson to be learned here for that in terms of your personal design preferences may not be the ideal for the market.
That's an interesting point, right? Because like this is something like as I've matured, like I've come to realize and embrace. But like if I had that attitude starting out, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you, right? So it's such a weird dance to take, right? It's like
Right.
I don't know, yeah.
That's called a customer base of one. That doesn't bode well for revenue. So.
But that's, this is, you bring it up. I mean, it's really about empathy. with whomever is your consumer or your end user or however you're going to describe it. I mean, and that's sort of part and parcel how I got into this field in the first place, because I was hired as an anthropologist. I lived in people's houses, looked at how they use tech, and then over time that graduated into working on fashion tech and working with what would people might want to wear. Well, they don't want to wear ugly things generally, even if Francis is making them. But you can't account for taste everywhere.
Ugly's kind of in right now. That's like that's what's in fashion. But I'm taking that
That's
that
the
approach.
quote from tonight.
Ugly is in. I'm taking that approach now because I'm working on one product, and I don't want to put all of this money into prototyping this one thing and then no one actually likes it. That would just be a waste of money, right?
But yeah.
Even with the sponsors. So what I'm doing is I'm pre-designing it, different options, and then I'm showing it to the potential clients to get that data back.
But ugly, okay, this dovetails back into the tools, right?
Okay.
No, it does, because like when I started working with 3D printing, we were making all these like lattices, and like we didn't have any control over them, and they were awkward, but I had to make them because that was just what 3D printed, like the way it was priced. Like there were things we had to do to the form that nobody was used to seeing, right? And that was ugly.
And it's because of the tool itself.
Right, but what ended up happening is like we learned how to deal with those geometries. Like I learned how to make them attractive, right? And it's like if I didn't cross that line and look for the alien, I wouldn't have really been able to define that
Aliens are
language, right?
sexy.
Because you have
I
to
love
create,
aliens.
you have to create an aesthetic language around these things, and like you just have to go there. And I think that's why, like, if we started out seeking a business or profit, like I would have never found that,
Right.
and we wouldn't have that. Like it just, I don't know. But it's all related, right? Like the tool, a new paradigm in making is going to give you a new set of form. It's going to give you a new language to work with, and you're going to be uncomfortable with it. And only time is going to smooth that out. I'm done now.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. And we're talking about tools. I wanted to go back to Asher. You said that you provide a couple of options, for them to choose from. How are you? Do you sketch? Do you
Oh, yeah,
do
for
it
sure.
electronically? What do you do?
Well, now that I have the iPad Pro with the stylus and the Procreate, I don't know if y'all use that, but it's amazing. There you go. Yeah, you should
there are
get
some
it.
users out there.
But I think that's even a way for sustainability, right? Like imagine if companies can say, hey, choose the design that you would purchase before it's even made. I think would be an interesting way of preventing excess waste.
There's a little bit of a distortion of that happening with a company in India. They're actually looking at what's selling, and specifically they're looking at the elements that are selling. Oh, a cap sleeve, a bare midriff, and they're Frankensteining together clothing, and it's working, which makes me a little ill, but it's working. They're selling.
This is why everything you learn in design school is wrong, right? Like, I mean, that's why you just don't listen.
Yeah, and is the consumer right? Like just because it sells, is that good?
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, is that good that it sells? I mean.
Like, yeah, I mean, I'm interested. I've never really worked at a large company as a designer. Like, I wonder at large companies if you have the pressure of, these are the reports, this is what's selling, and then you have these egos saying you need to meet the numbers, but then you're like, wait, that's not good. So.
Well, but this is the danger with AI in design, right? Because it's going to create this like echo chamber. Like, like we were just talking earlier about like an aesthetic for 3D printing and trying, like, an AI would never anticipate that because it needs historical information, right? So like, yeah, sure, like it's easy to predict what will sell when we have historical data. How do you predict what will sell when there is no historical data? And like that's a whole different situation.
Huh. Is there a situation with no historical data?
Well, like at the time when I was designing 3D printed
Weird bike
products,
racks.
like yeah, there was none. Like there was no like I couldn't find a data set of people purchasing 3D printed products and understanding how they would react to those shapes, right? There was no way to do that. And an AI would have never anticipated that, nor been able to give me an answer to that question.
Right. Do you use any quantitative tools, Asher? Like any kind of understanding of trends or things like that from like the data, or?
You know what? It's so surprising. Like, I mean, I actually think all of our brains are connected. And I'm sure a lot of you think the same thing. It's just that we don't have the technology to measure it. And when I started 10 years ago just being obsessed with these fractals, I thought I was the only one. But then you see people like Francis and Iris Van Herpen and all of these other designers that are making these things, and like now even Nike's all about the fractals, and it makes me happy to see that actually. And I you know what, at the same time it could just be we have an algorithm in our own head, and we're seeing people on the streets, and we're absorbing culture, and those are kind of like our boundaries, and we're just doing that naturally. Yeah.
Billy, you've been suspiciously quiet.
We haven't
I know it's yeah.
I was like, do you want to direct a question over here, or?
I thought you were going to jump in on this, but I mean, you obviously have quantitative data. You obviously design for technology to be integrated in your garments. I mean,
But there's no one else making haptic clothing. So it's not like I can refer back and say, oh, people like using haptics for this. Actually, no, that's not true. I can probably do that.
That's exactly what I'm wondering about. I think it's very interesting. You got into a space doing something nobody was doing. I mean, when we think of haptics, maybe we think of our phones when they vibrate, and it's always hard on hard, right? It's annoying on the desk and things like that, but you're doing it into soft spaces. And what kind of feedback have you gotten from people? Do they say it's eerie? Do they say it's interesting? What do they say?
I mean, it's actually one of my favorite parts about doing consumer trials is when we give them a surprise vibration. So when they don't really see it coming, and you've already connected via Bluetooth, and then suddenly it honestly makes everyone smile. First time around, everyone's like, "Oh wow, cool." We call it the V face. I know that's a bit inappropriate, but it's a vibe face, vibrations. What I guess became really interesting for us, and I will share a slightly more inappropriate anecdote.
I was going to go there, but I'm glad you're taking it.
My career in haptics really started in a place that you might expect. I made vibrating knickers for couples in long-distance relationships. And I made it for Durex, the condom company. Yes, you're welcome. The product was called Funderwear. I like to nickname it Funder from Down Under. And it was a men's and women's product, and you could connect to any partner you'd like over vast distances. So you had an app, and inside the app you would see a form, whether it was male or female, whoever you were choosing to stimulate. And men and women would interact with the software really differently. So a woman would see the software, and whether it was a man or a female form, they would create figure eights and use different intensities on the screen and really move it around the body. So it was this very much a language that was being translated onto the form. A man would see the app, and he would go for one spot only, and it was buzz, 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 buzz. And we honestly tested this on hundreds of people, and it was the same thing every time. I know.
It's even better when she tells the story with a prop.
It's true. We did do that at South by Southwest the first time we released the product. What became interesting about that, though, was that people were having very different experiences when receiving the experience when they were being stimulated. So when someone was moving the vibrations around and changing the intensity and really creating this, what I like to call a song on the body, they would have a far more interesting experience than someone who was, very much hyperlocal. So that is what really stirred us to bring out the new products where we could dance with vibration around the body in multiple ways. And it really is like choreographing music. It is something that we think is like a melody. You can create these different syncopations, and it does mean something very different when it's paired with an audio instruction, or it can be about direction, or it can be about rotation. And these sensations on the body are actually really primal. And we talk about language as something that's really important to design, and using the right terminology for both digital languages and physical languages. Truly, vibration is the oldest of all the languages, older than dance, older than music, older than sound. We vibrate as humans in space. Objects vibrate in space. Nature vibrates in space. We are all, dare I say, one big vibration. And it is something that's so underutilized. And
another quote for the night.
Yeah. So the product that we released only a year and a bit ago is a product called Nadi X. And Nadi means flow in Sanskrit. And it is about activating your nadis, which I will get hippie on you. It is about when you activate all of your chakras, the external pathways around your body are called the nadi. And when you activate those, you feel little vibrations on the body. And that's what we are trying to get people to really listen to.
Boom. That's like a mic drop. So before we move to questions, I'm going to ask some simple questions of the panelists, and this is inspired. I don't know if any of you watched Inside the Actors Studio. No? James Lipton? Yeah, somebody did. So I'm inspired by these questions that he derived from two other people, two other Frenchmen. But at any rate, I want to make sure we get to the questions. I'm going to start, and we'll work right on down the line. What is your favorite word, Francis?
Favorite word?
Favorite word.
They're all really useful, Todd.
You don't play this game very well.
Hello?
That's okay.
I don't
all
know,
right.
man. That's tough. I'm gonna come back to me.
Come back to you.
Discombobulated, because that's how I feel most of the time.
If you go to the Milwaukee, Wisconsin airport, there is a recombobulation area.
Ooh. Does it have nadi? Because maybe it should.
Asher.
I get a pass. I don't know.
Ah, come on. All right. Jim, can you do it? No?
Favorite word?
Yeah.
I guess one thing that comes to mind right now is this week happens to be something that's a very special time in my life in terms of April 10th was when my family boarded a plane to immigrate to the U.S.
Oh, that's cool.
So, we're coming up on that tomorrow. So the word that comes to mind today is belong.
Awesome.
And so that's the word for this week, anyways.
All right, we'll go easier on Asher. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally? Yeah, maybe aliens, maybe.
Honestly, just I like looking up at the sky.
Yeah?
And it's totally awesome, and to think about light and and how whether you're looking at the sun, which is hydrogen plasma, right, and you're looking at all the other hydrogen plasma, and then realizing that, wait, hold on, I'm eating living things that, synthesize these molecules using the wavelength from the hydrogen plasma.
Asher goes deep.
This is my brain every single second. And then we ingest those molecules to re-release that energy that was created from the fusion of the intense gravity of the hydrogen protons into helium, and then therefore I am alive. Right, and then my body synthesizes other molecules to continue being alive. So it all comes from the sky.
Wow, that's a good answer. What about you, Billy?
Ooh, yeah. I guess I actually really like humans, and I think that surprises me every day. Truly seeing someone really connect with themselves, the space around them, and the people they care about. I actually think that's all we can really do in life. Yeah. So that's what inspires me.
That's good.
Yeah, I like that. I always say I love humanity, and I really don't like people. Yeah.
This is why we're friends.
Yeah. For me, I think it's like these milestones in human achievement, right? Like I like to see what people collectively, like when you act out on your deepest desires, right? Like that's so interesting to me to see like what we choose to strive for as a group, like going to space, or I like to see what people do, because I think as a designer that's our future, right? Like that's the condition we're designing for. Like that's the thing we're trying to unlock. That's what's going to inspire you and get you to connect with something. So those are the things that I like to see. It's like where we all come together and like we support something as a group of people.
That's beautiful. Nice. Okay. All right. You have Jim? Did you answer that one?
I think we can just go ahead and move on to some of the other questions
What is
here.
that? All right, I'll do one more, and then we'll do questions. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Me? You want to start here?
If you have an answer.
Yeah, that would be a beautiful job. Yeah, yeah. No, I think like well, lately I'm like, if I wasn't doing this, I would probably either be doing something with food or I would have been a lawyer.
Wow.
Those are my
They don't
two,
sound
like,
related.
No, well, they kind of are, right? I mean, it's all like, it's logic. You're just structuring things. You're structuring things in order. That's kind of what I like to do, I've realized.
I mean, I'd like to be an urban planner or make medical devices. I think that'd be, I mean, not that either of those are really out of whack.
Cool.
I'd probably be like studying worms or something like that.
All right. Jim?
Well, I mean, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing right now, I'd be a designer.
Oh, there we go.
Don't do it.
You know, Asher was talking about like competitive stitching. I mean, I was doing the competitive Excel spreadsheets, so.
All right, with that, why don't we open up to the audience? I don't see Britt. There she is. Do you have any questions collected, or no?
We can start collecting now.
Okay. Or, yeah, while we're collecting them, if somebody has one they want to yell out, we're happy to.
Yeah, what kind of eco materials are you using, Asher?
What kind of eco materials is Asher using?
So right now we're working in mycelium leather, and it's like a mycelium fungus. I've been sourcing it from all over the world, but the best ones are coming out of San Francisco, out of like Bolt and Myco Works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of papery still. Like the thing is like the protein molecules are like, they're like really twisted, and with the molecules of the mycelium, you don't get that entanglement that gives it the elasticity. So that's kind of like I'm approaching these companies because I do a lot of material experimentation with various types of elastomers in my own studio, and I want to work with them to make their product better.
Yep. So the question was where we see 3D scanning relative to being available to the everyday consumer.
It's still a bottleneck. I think like the new iPhone has a pretty good like sensor on the front. That seems to be okay, but like there's still a lot of problems in stitching those scans together. Like we deal with this all the time, and I would say it's like the capturing of that 3D scan is a very big bottleneck. I think computer, like it's going to probably be photographs. Like I think computer, like what I'm seeing happen with computer vision is going to probably bridge that gap. Like I think we'll develop models that are really good at inferring depth and spatial and scale information from like that work's all very promising. Like I don't know, it'll either be we get really good depth sensors on all the phones, or like it's probably going to be the latter, right? Like
And there's some commercially available stuff that happens in fitting rooms and things like that.
Yeah, but they're expensive and complicated rigs, and like I think the big value is not having to go to the store, right? Like I think that's always the thing that people are asking when like our clients try to do this. Like that's what they want. They want you to sit in the privacy of your home, capture a scan, and then like get a personalized product for you. And I think we've got to get something more ubiquitous, or like just a cleaner way of getting that data for it to really work. And I don't think it's quite there, but it's really close.
Jim, you got some?
Yeah, we got some questions from the audience here, and I'll start with the first question being, how do you reconcile empathy versus data? Let's just start with that one.
That's a Billy.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Give me the hard ones,
Billy
guys.
and I could do that one.
I mean, it's a constant revolving circle. So you've got art and science, or empathy and data. and then it's 1 arrow this way and 1 arrow that way, and it's constantly informing one another. There's no weight of 50% and 50 on the other. It's always going to be a constant revolving circle. As we kind of talked about, it's about having the right people in the room. And that means for me, it's not a solo journey. It means that there's many people helping us inform these things and heaps of customers. I mean, we do go and put products on people all the time and get feedback and change things. And that, to me, that being able to change things fast is really important. So you've got to make an assumption somewhere, because if you only go to the customer, you probably wouldn't build anything. Yeah. So you've got to, have a philosophy and have a direction and build from your gut and your imagination, and then go and test it and change it again.
Yeah, and in our experience, I mean, we do a lot of research with our intended audience. We try to understand who it is. I mean, we made AI glasses for cyclists and runners, and I started out by instrumenting a whole bunch of bikes and people, and I went out riding, ride 20, 30, 40 miles again and again, and understand the visual language, understanding the things people talk about when they cycle. Fortunately, I do, so it's easier to empathize, but you start to learn the language of empathy and then square it against the data. It's like, how do they talk? What do they do? And what does your data suggest, whether it's qualitative data or quant data?
And this is going to sound cynical, but nobody's better at this than the advertising industry, right? I mean,
they're pretty good at it.
Like, they've been doing this since before computers, right? Like,
yeah,
they put data and empathy together. So,
all right,
it's problem
solved. Do you want to take one, or I got one here too?
So the agencies aren't dead.
So here was a good question. Some advice for finding your own aesthetic when you use the same computational software as everyone else. Dun, dun, dun.
Don't use the software.
Yeah, I mean, that was...
Make your own like this guy does.
I think I mean, you're right. Like, it's hard, but I think also, like, you have to think about the tool, right? Like why does this exist and what does it mean? And I think, like, people don't ask themselves that. Like, when I was starting doing this work, like, for example, like, I see a lot of these tessellation patterns that, like for example, like these 3D Voronoi structures that, like, there's plugins for Rhino and you can just generate it with a button. Like, when I was doing this work, you couldn't do that. Like, I had to go to the library, find a math book from the 50s, and, like, try to teach myself how to write this, like, in Python or whatever.
You did
I was
this?
trying to. Yeah, I mean, that was how I did all that work in the beginning, and, like, it forced me to really understand what I was doing, and then I was thinking about the construction of that geometry as a means of expression. And I think, like, the problem now, what I see with a lot of, like, young designers in design school, like, especially even when we hire people, they'll come in and I think they know all this stuff, but they really don't know anything. Like, one guy, he told me, I think of myself like a DJ. I press the button, but I don't know what it's gonna do. And I'm like, and I'm just like, I need a better interview process, and like, and it's like, I don't want DJs, right? It's like, because then it's like, but that's exactly the point. Or he's making mashups of things, right? He's like, he's taking textures and borrowing things, and he's not thinking on a meaningful level about the construction of form. And these tools are no different. It's the same as drawing, right? It's just you're able to do a lot of drawing really fast. And if you're not mindful when you set out at the beginning, you end up with a big pile of crap, right? And I don't know, you probably have a different view.
No, actually, I'm just far more analog when, doing any part of our industrial design. We use silicon putty. And we shove a bunch of electronics in it, and then we try and design for the form. Like, literally put it on the body and, like, oh, what shape should it be in? This will help, this will do. And then iterate and test it again, and iterate and test it again, and get to a point where it's a shape that's not really offensive, and then try again. But honestly, silicon putty dries in 10 minutes. For me, that's where all of our design processes start, is honestly with silicon putty and a bunch of illustrations and a pair of tights.
So that's how you arrived at, like, the kidney shape?
Yeah.
Cool. I didn't know you'd done that either.
It's cheaper.
Yeah.
So we have a question here, and I hope I'm reading this correctly. What would you build using all your respective projects or superpowers together?
I know why I don't get jobs with Intel, so I'll say it. I mostly don't get jobs with Intel because I always have too many ideas and I want to do it my way. But what I would do with all of you is I'd make a panty liner that reads, no one go do this because that would really annoy me. I want to do a panty liner that reads exactly when you ovulate. And it reads your mucus when it changes from acid to base. And then it maps it on a beautiful calendar so you know exactly for how long you ovulate. But it's paired with a little bit of underwear, so it vibrates. And And then it also sends you a very interesting text message, one of 3 options. An emoji with, sorry, I'm going to be so inappropriate. An emoji with an eggplant, the woman who's crossing her arms, or the little pregnant mama. And we'd use really interesting computer-based design.
There we go.
We could also do clothing for worms.
I do make clothing for animals. Yes.
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. We've talked about this a little bit, and like the scoliosis brace was part way down that path. You know, I like doing good with my friends.
And that's
Show me the money.
That's the nice thing about medical devices. Yeah.
All right, this last question is, how would a layperson with fashion ideas collaborate with designers and protect their intellectual rights? So advice.
Wait, repeat that? I didn't catch it.
So how would a layperson with fashion ideas collaborate with the designer and protect their intellectual property rights? Maybe share your experience.
I mean, that can easily be done through an agreement that 2 people sign. But
talk about it.
also, an idea is really an idea, and like the what you get out of the amazing idea at the end comes from experimenting and going through a process. And I think we've all been down that road of, you have an idea, but wait, what if you did this and then this failed? But then if we tweak that, it comes to this, and then you make something amazing, and then it's a collaboration. But I think legal law is very creative, and you can be very creative in agreements with people. What do you want out of it? What are you putting into it? And what are your expectations of both parties? And if you can lay that out in a very short and concise way, I think that's a very easy way to protect.
And be upfront with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think every single time I've had a new customer or client come to me and ask me to sign an NDA before I hear the idea, every single time it's a terrible idea. It seems that the people who are most concerned are the ones that shouldn't be.
Well, I encountered this a little bit when I started our sort of big fashion tech collaborations, when we brought Anouk Viprecht to work with us. She was functioning like an artist in residence, but we don't really have a system for an artist in residence. So, I mean, a lot of it was upfront discussion of, you know, the technology side, the physical objects that would be ours, but the intellectual property of the design would be hers. And we talked about it up front, and we put it in paper, and it worked.
I get this question a lot in terms of entrepreneurs or designers, somebody with an idea trying to develop that and take it to market. And the simplest way that I explain this is, you know, mirroring what others have said here in terms of documenting and having your iterations documented so that you have proof of concept. But also the simplest way to look at this is a legal agreement, but think of it from the context of having your divorce papers before you get married. So
That's a prenup,
probably
right?
The simplest way to describe that, because I mean, you've worked out how you're going to separate in terms of taking what's yours before you decide to work together. It's a horrible analogy, but at the same time, it's very practical in that sense.
I mean, I think there's a few schools of thought here. There's one that, like, collaboration, especially in this day and age, is the only currency. And so working with people is super important. You're going to build better products if you work together. The second space for me is, like, if we're trying to build an industry here, which we are, you have to be able to work together because we need economies of scale so that people actually know what the hell we're building. Here's an interesting example, but if there's more people building what I build, the cost of a part of my product will come down extraordinarily because it'll be ordered in larger quantities. And I can place that larger order and then sell it off to my competitors at a cheaper price. This is something that is, like, it's just good business. It's not that I want intellectual property over that particular piece or item. It's just about how do you bring down the cost so you can do this at scale. And then the third one, which unfortunately you really do have to do, is get really expensive fancy lawyers and make sure your shit's patented.
Yeah. Are there, oh, I think that was a question that fell down. There we go.
Wow, that's a tough one. Custom clothing has been something reserved for high-end consumers. How do you make custom at all price points?
You don't.
It will happen.
There's like an interesting story around Shoes of Prey, right? Does anyone know that company? So they only recently shut down last year, and they had a reasonable amount of success for a really long time. And they had investors from Nordstrom, and actually Jodie's a really good friend of mine. Australians, we kind of stick together. And the lessons were more about how tough it was in a physical space to do custom pieces than it was about how successful they were digitally. There's always going to be people who come out guns blazing early, and it's going to take a really long time. But like anything, we produce fabric at scale. So figuring out, it's more about the manufacturing process than anything. And that's where you have smart people like these guys around.
Yeah, and I mean, we have a vision of like the future where everything is customized, but if you want to do it today, I think you focus on one product and you don't make a lot of different options. You customize it, like do a shirt, one basic shirt, right? And then in the future you can be any style. But if you simplify the product, I think it's easier to reach different price points.
Yeah, I think so. In serious, it's like you're right. It's like you design for customization, right? Like I think if you're gonna just take things the way we have them now and try to bring it to every, like it's like they're design decisions you make early on, because there's certain things in the manufacturing process where it's very, very, like it's very hard to have a custom pattern for everybody.
Well, you
right?
did
like,
3D printed shoes that were custom.
Right, and like well, that was a real haul. I mean, yeah, it can be done.
But it was big enough. But it was big enough that the process was actually picked up at DSW. I mean.
Yeah, no, and they did it, and they built that factory, and they built that infrastructure, and that company's still around in a different form now. But like, yeah, it can be done. I mean, that's an example of just brute forcing your way through it. Like I think, because like again, like it's kind of like before, talking about the form. Like somebody has to be first, right? Like this infrastructure doesn't exist. But like what we've, like some of our clients now, like they're components that are personalized, right? Like what they'll figure out, okay, well, like this part of the supply chain does enable me to do personalized components, but this part does not. And then there's a design challenge of like, how do you bring those pieces together, right? And then like, I think, that the company you're talking about, they tried to do too much too fast, I would say, right? And I think like the people I'm seeing succeed now are the ones that they understand which parts can be and which parts need to be standardized for the time.
Yeah.
We have one more question here. Do you think that AI can help put a stop to mass consumerism in apparel, fast fashion, and producing waste?
It's gonna make it worse. Like it hands down will make it worse. I mean, the example like we just said, right? Like because it only knows what's come before, right? So like if you think about like the incentives in place to sell T-shirts or whatever you're trying to sell, I want to reduce risk. I want to increase conversion rate. So it's going to make things go towards the mean. That's how these systems are set up.
I think I'm a little more hopeful than you. I mean, I see your doom and gloom, and I raise it. No, I mean,
yeah, but like just look at the economic forces in play, right? Like it's like gravity. Like it's gonna drag it down to the middle.
I spent time in Europe with a major fast fashion company just a few weeks ago, and they have a major AI initiative connected to their sustainability efforts, and it's helping them to use less water, to ship less product, to do a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of bad things about fast fashion, but their reach is incredible to impact change. And they obviously have a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of terrible things that they can start working on now. And they're using AI to do it, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, but I think I haven't seen AI produce new ideas, right? And that's where my pessimism comes in.
Yeah.
And I don't think it can. That's not its role. Right, like I think like we're still thinking like we're gonna have HAL. We have nothing close to HAL. Like it's not the nature of those tools. Like it's not the nature of those algorithms. Right, they're statistics.
That's true.
It's statistical analysis, which we've always had. Right, so if we think about like what the capacity this gives us as human beings, it helps us do some things faster that we've always been able to do. But like there aren't things that AIs do that we can't do as humans, right? So like I think like the thought that it's going to bring us to some enlightened plane is probably wrong, right? Like that's most likely not going to be the case. Sorry.
Oh, there's a question up there.
What we're doing right now is, I mean, I don't. It depends how you define it. Like, is it like the Steven Spielberg movie? No, right? Like, it's not. And like, I mean, that's like a semantic question, right? Like, I don't. Maybe. I mean, maybe it is. Like, maybe this is what it is right now. Like this. I mean, we're calling it AI, so I guess that's what it is. But like, it's not. You know, like that. Like we're a synthesis of so many complex systems, and like I think like even this idea that like what these singularity people are like, oh, we're going to scan the brain, we're going to understand the structure of the neurons, and we're going to make a human brain. Like no, like right, because like we already know like our bacteria is part of the equation. We have no idea how to model that stuff, and like we have no computer chips that come close to that. Like we're so far away from understanding intelligence that it's not even funny. So like I don't think like this is going to be the answer. I don't think we're going to head another AI winter either. Like I think we're finding a lot of really great applications, and like I have another company that is an AI company that works with computer vision, and like I believe in it, and that's why we started it. But like I don't think it's like it's not the AI of the movies yet. Like it's really far away.
All right, I've got one question. I think we'll make it our last. Yeah? Do you have an? Yeah? All right.
That's it.
This one would be, would it be possible to create a garment that measured pulse and gave off a scent related to the current body state to suit your moment? The answer is yes.
Everything is possible with enough time and enough money.
Well, I can already imagine the architecture. I can imagine the pieces I'd put
Oh yeah,
in.
that shit all exists.
It gives off a scent.
Yeah.
You can do that, really?
Yeah, you can do it. Well, you can do it with, in Asia, you can actually buy USB scent sticks. And I could easily like rig a couple of those up. Yeah.
My first really terrible wearable idea was a wrist device that had multiple different scents that you could have your scent change throughout the day depending on your hormone levels.
Yep.
It was a terrible idea, trust
The
me.
answer is yes.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, I think that's it. Thank
Thank
you.
you.